One bite of Hattie's sourdough made the most feared cowboy in Silver Plume slam his fist down and demand the baker. So why was his hand trembling? Tin cups jumped as Grayson Cade struck the table. The piano died mid-note. Snow hissed against the saloon windows, while Hattie stood behind the kitchen door, flour on her hands. "Who baked this bread?" he thundered. She stepped out. "I did." Then she saw his face. What had he tasted? "Tell me your guess below." On payday nights, the Caldwell boarding house could be heard halfway down Silver Plume's main street. The piano hammered out a tune beneath miners' laughter. Boots scraped pine floorboards. Tin cups struck tables. Cards slapped down. And every time the front door opened, a blade of Colorado cold cut through the room. Outside, the first hard snow of late autumn had begun. Inside the kitchen, Hattie Coulter never saw any of it directly. She stood before the 6-burner iron range with her sleeves rolled above her elbows, moving between roasting beef, a pot of beans, boiled potatoes, and a pan of gravy that needed constant stirring. Steam dampened the curls around her forehead. Flour marked the front of her faded dress and both of her dark hands. Behind her, 4 sourdough loaves rested near the stove. Those were hers. Not Caldwell's, not Silver Plume's, hers. Hattie lifted one and listened to the crust crack softly as it cooled. For a moment, the noise beyond the swinging kitchen door disappeared. She smiled. Beside the flour bin sat an old crock holding the thing she valued most. A sourdough starter her mother had carried west from Tennessee, and her grandmother had kept alive before that. Hattie called it Bessie. The kitchen door swung inward. Clara Caldwell slipped through carrying 3 dirty plates. "Hattie." Something in Clara's face made Hattie stop stirring. "What is it?" Clara lowered her voice. "Pa says don't come through the dining room tonight. Not even to carry dishes." Hattie looked at her. Beyond the door came another burst of laughter. She caught only part of the joke. Something about a woman needing 2 chairs. More laughter followed. Clara looked ashamed. "I'm sorry." Hattie pressed her knuckles into the warm dough waiting on the work table. "It isn't you saying it." Before Clara could answer, Jebediah Caldwell shoved through the door. He inspected a perfectly orderly kitchen, as though determined to find a crime. "Gravy's too thick." "It hasn't finished yet." His eyes narrowed. Hattie corrected herself. "I'll see to it, Mr. Caldwell." "You'd better. Every bed upstairs is taken, and half the mine seems determined to drink my whiskey tonight." His gaze moved toward the swinging door. "And stay back here. Customers came to eat, not stare at the help." He left before Hattie answered. $2 a month. An attic room narrow enough that the roof sloped over her bed. Meals taken after everyone else had finished. That was what Caldwell considered generous. Hattie looked again at the bread. At least nobody could make those loaves ashamed of what they were. Then the front door slammed open. The piano stopped in the middle of a note. Even through the kitchen wall, Hattie felt the silence. She moved closer to the swinging door and looked through the narrow gap. A huge man stood inside the entrance. Snow melted across a wolfskin coat stretched over shoulders broad enough to nearly fill the doorway. A Winchester rested in one gloved hand. His beard was dark and heavy, and a pale scar ran from his left cheek toward his brow. Grayson Cade. Grizzly Cade. Even Hattie knew the stories. He lived alone above the snow line, trapped through winter, guided men through the high country, handled horses nobody else could settle, and came down from the mountain only when he needed supplies. Men who laughed at almost everything did not laugh at Grayson Cade. Jebediah hurried toward him. "Mr. Cade, didn't expect you down before winter." Grayson merely looked around. Then he chose a table in the darkest corner. Clara hurried into the kitchen minutes later. Plate. Hattie carved beef, added potatoes and gravy, then cut a thick slice from the warmest sourdough loaf. Clara carried it away. Hattie watched through the door. Grayson ignored the beef. He picked up the bread, smelled it. His expression changed. He took one bite, then another. His hand tightened around the crust. Suddenly his fist struck the table. Tinware jumped. Several men stood. "Who baked this bread?" The question rolled across the room. Jebediah went pale. "If there's something wrong with it, Cade, I'll replace—" "I asked who baked it." Behind the kitchen door, Hattie could hear her own heartbeat. For one terrible instant, she was 12 again, staring at a burned stew while her father's anger filled a Tennessee kitchen. She could remain hidden. Let Caldwell speak. Let somebody else take the blame. Then Hattie looked down at the flour on her hands. The bread was good. She knew it was good. She pushed through the swinging door. Every face turned toward her. Grayson rose. Hattie wanted to retreat, but she made herself stand still. "I did." Grayson crossed the room. He stopped before her, towering over her. "Where'd you get that starter?" Hattie blinked. "My mother." "Before her?" "My grandmother." "Where?" "Tennessee." Something broke across his face. "Where in Tennessee?" she told him. Grayson stared at the bread. His hand began to shake. "My mother came from near there." The room remained absolutely still. "She made bread like this." His voice roughened. "I haven't tasted it since I was a boy." A tear crossed the scar on his cheek. Hattie forgot the rifle, the wolfskin, the stories. For the first time, she saw only a lonely man holding a piece of bread, as though it had carried someone home to him. Grayson wiped his face and turned toward Caldwell. "What do you pay her?" Jebediah hesitated. "Room, meals, $2 monthly." Grayson's jaw hardened. He put money on the counter. "Anything she legitimately owes you comes out of that. Anything you've withheld from her gets settled tonight. The rest is an advance for her." Jebediah stared at the money. "So you're buying her contract?" Grayson turned cold. "I'm settling what you say she owes. I'm not settling her." Then he faced Hattie. "I need a cook at my place. $20 a month. Food. Your own room. Proper winter clothes. If you decide you don't like the arrangement, you leave." Jebediah laughed nervously. "She won't last a week up there." Grayson never looked at him. "She heard me." His eyes remained on Hattie. "Let her answer." Nobody had asked Hattie what she wanted in a very long time. She looked toward the kitchen where Bessie waited beside the stove, then toward the snow gathering beyond the windows. "Yes," she said. 20 minutes later, everything Hattie owned fit into one worn bag. Clara slipped a pair of wool stockings into it. "For the mountain." Hattie hugged her once. Outside, Grayson wrapped a heavy buffalo robe around Hattie before helping her onto a steady pack mule. They climbed for 4 freezing hours. Silver Plume became a handful of lights below them, then disappeared entirely behind black timber and falling snow. Near midnight, the trees opened. Hattie stared. Grayson Cade did not live in a shack. A broad timber and stone house stood against the mountainside, its chimney sending smoke into the moonlit cold. Inside, Grayson lit a lamp. Hattie took 3 steps and stopped. A long dining table stood before her. 3 places had been carefully set. 3 plates, 3 cups, 3 chairs. Yet Grayson Cade lived alone. Then Hattie noticed the iron-reinforced door beyond the kitchen. A heavy lock hung from it. Grayson followed her gaze. His hand closed around a key hanging beneath his shirt. "That door stays shut unless I'm with you." For the first time since leaving Silver Plume, Hattie felt cold again. She looked from the iron lock to Grayson's face. He offered no explanation. He only took her bag upstairs and showed her a clean bedroom overlooking the dark pines. There was a real bed, a washstand, a small iron stove, and a quilt folded neatly at the foot. Hattie touched the quilt. "This is mine? As long as you want it." That answer stayed with her. Before dawn the next morning, she dressed quickly, expecting to find a list of chores waiting downstairs. Instead, Grayson had already hauled water from the covered cistern and filled the wood box beside the kitchen range. "Where do you want the flour?" he asked. Hattie stared at him. "Where do I want it?" "You run the kitchen." No man had ever said those words to her. By breakfast, she had discovered that Grayson's house was better supplied than Caldwell's entire boarding house. There was a smokehouse behind the cabin, a stone root cellar beneath it, sacks of beans and cornmeal, smoked venison, dried apples, rendered fat, molasses, coffee, and enough potatoes to last well into winter. The flour, however, was stored against damp stone. Hattie pointed at it. "That has to move." Grayson moved it. No argument. No sigh. He simply carried each 50-pound sack where she directed. Over the next several days, Hattie learned the rhythm of the mountain. Grayson checked traps at first light. He tended 2 saddle horses and the pack mules himself. Red-painted poles marked the safer winter trail when snow covered the ground. Every afternoon he split wood before the temperature fell. And every evening, Hattie set 3 places. The first time, she assumed she would eat afterward in the kitchen. Grayson looked at the empty chair opposite him. "Food's hot now." Hattie hesitated. "You mean for me to sit there?" "I don't see anybody else standing behind you." She sat, but the other 2 places remained untouched. When supper ended, Grayson carried both plates to the iron door. The brass key came from beneath his shirt. He unlocked the door, disappeared inside, then returned several minutes later with empty plates. Hattie heard something behind him, a faint scrape, then the hollow shifting of stone somewhere deep underground. The door locked again. She asked nothing. The ritual continued. 3 plates, 3 cups, 3 portions of bread. 2 disappeared behind iron. Some nights Hattie wondered if injured relatives lived there. Other nights she imagined an animal Grayson had rescued. Once, after hearing a long groan beneath the floor, she wondered whether someone was being kept against his will. Yet Grayson never frightened her. That was the strange part. One morning a young pack horse panicked when wind snapped a loose piece of canvas beside the corral. Hattie expected Grayson to seize the reins and overpower it. Instead, he stepped sideways, lowered his shoulders, waited. "Easy, boy." The horse gradually stopped fighting. Grayson stroked its neck. When he turned, he found Hattie watching from the porch. "Something wrong?" "No." "You look worried." Hattie pulled her shawl tighter. "Just learning the difference between stories and men." Something almost became a smile beneath his beard. Winter tightened around them. Hattie began leaving coffee near the door before Grayson went out at dawn. In return, things appeared in her kitchen after his supply trips. Cinnamon, dried apples, new sewing needles, a jar of molasses. Neither called them gifts. When Grayson tore a work glove, Hattie stitched the leather beside the fire. 3 days later, she noticed him wearing it, while the newer pair remained untouched on a shelf. She said nothing about that either. Their silences were becoming comfortable. One afternoon, Hattie fought with a stiff batch of rye dough. Sweat gathered along her forehead as she leaned her weight into it. Grayson appeared in the doorway. Hattie gave a breathless little laugh. "Don't mind me, big clumsy woman fighting a piece of dough." Grayson stopped. The room changed. "Don't bring Caldwell's voice into this house." Hattie's hands became still. "I was only joking." "No." He came to the table. "That man said it often enough that now you're doing his work for him." Hattie looked down. Grayson pointed toward the cooling bread, the orderly pantry, the fire burning steadily in the range. "You kept that chimney alive when it froze last week. You moved half these winter stores before I knew what you were doing. And you've been wrestling that dough for 20 minutes without quitting." His voice softened. "I don't see anything weak standing there." Hattie swallowed. She turned back to the dough because she did not trust herself to speak. A moment later, Two enormous hands settled into the flower beside hers. "What now?" Grayson asked. Hattie glanced at him. "Need." So they did, side by side. A week later, Grayson returned from Georgetown with a paper-wrapped bundle. Inside was a deep burgundy wool coat lined at the collar and cuffs with soft fur. Hattie stared at it. "This isn't mine." "It is if it fits." She slipped it on. It fit beautifully, not tightly, not awkwardly, as though somebody had considered the shape of her before making it. Grayson suddenly became interested in the fire. "Looks like they got the measure right." Hattie narrowed her eyes. "You had them measure a coat for a woman who wasn't there?" His ears reddened. "I gave them your old coat." "You stole my coat?" "Borrowed." Hattie laughed. The sound surprised them both. Then Grayson laughed too, low and rusty, as if he had nearly forgotten how. That evening the laughter was gone. He had found 3 sets of tracks along the lower trail. Later he stood at the window staring toward a distant orange glow among the trees. "A campfire?" Hattie asked. "Yes." "Hunters?" "Not where they're camped." She glanced toward the iron door. "Does this have something to do with what's behind there?" Grayson remained quiet. "Is there silver in that mountain?" His reflection stared back at her from the dark glass. "There was enough to cost me everything." He said nothing more. 3 nights later, while Hattie was clearing supper, a heavy crash came from behind the iron door. The china rattled. Dust sifted from the frame. Hattie jumped. Grayson went white. His hand closed around the key at his neck. "Grayson." He moved toward the door. She stepped between him and it. "I don't need to know every secret you've got." He looked down at her. "But I need to know whether something behind that door can hurt us." For a long moment, only the winter wind spoke. Grayson pulled the iron key from beneath his shirt. "Nothing behind it can hurt you." His eyes lowered to the lock. "Me is another matter." He slid the key into the brass mechanism. The lock opened with a heavy click. Grayson pulled the iron door toward him. Cold air breathed out of the darkness beyond. And Hattie realized there was no room behind it at all. There was a tunnel. It went straight into the mountain. Grayson lifted the lantern higher. The passage was narrow, timbered in places, and raw stone in others. An old ore cart sat crooked on rusted wheels. Picks leaned against one wall beneath a coat of gray dust. Farther in, warped support beams disappeared into shadow. Hattie stepped across the threshold only after Grayson looked back and gave a small nod. Cold settled around her ankles. The tunnel bent once, then ended in ruin. A wall of collapsed stone filled the passage from floor to ceiling, granite wedged between broken timbers. At its base stood 2 small wooden crosses. Sarah Cade, William Cade. Hattie stopped breathing for a moment. Several china plates were stacked nearby. The same plates she had washed night after night. Grayson set the lantern down. He did not look at her. "Sarah was my wife." His voice barely carried. "William was our boy." Hattie moved no closer. Grayson crouched beside the smaller cross and brushed dust from the name with his thumb. He was 4. The mind seemed to hold the silence between them. 5 years earlier, Grayson told her, he had found signs of a promising vein deeper in the mountain. The supports near that cut were old. He knew they needed replacing, but silver had a way of making another hour seem harmless. "One more cut," he said. His mouth tightened. That was what I told myself. Sarah came up with William at midday, carrying lunch. The roof shifted. Grayson had been nearer the portal when the first timbers broke. Sarah and William were farther inside. He heard them after the collapse. William cried for him. Sarah told him not to come farther because the remaining roof was moving. Grayson went anyway. He clawed at stone until men from below dragged him back when another section began to fail. For hours he could still hear Sarah. Then only William. Then nothing. Hattie lowered herself slowly onto the cold ground. Grayson kept staring at the cross. Men came the next day, tried to shore it. His fingers curled into the dirt. They said another collapse could take the whole face down. He swallowed. I wouldn't let them blast. Hattie understood. The house, the locked door, the 3 plates, everything had been built around this place. I kept thinking if I'd stopped when she asked me, they'd have eaten supper at that table. His voice cracked on the last word. Hattie did not tell him it was not his fault. She knew better than to hand a man 5 easy words for 5 years of grief. Instead, she sat beside him. Minutes passed. The lantern flame made small movements against the stone. Hattie placed one hand palm up on the dirt between them. Grayson looked at it, then at her. Slowly, he put his hand in hers. His fingers were rough and cold. For a while, that was all. Then his shoulders began to shake. Hattie stayed. The next night, she set 3 plates. Grayson stared at them for a long time. He carried 2 behind the iron door. The night after that, he did the same. A week passed. Then one evening, Grayson took only 1 plate down. On it lay a thick piece of sourdough. Hattie heard him speaking quietly in the tunnel. She did not listen for the words. When he returned, he left the key hanging at his neck and sat down across from her. 2 nights later, Hattie reached automatically for a 3rd plate. Grayson said, 2. She stopped, looked at him, then set the china back in the cabinet. No congratulations, no questions. She poured his coffee. January crept toward them. Something in the house loosened. Grayson no longer ate like a man completing a duty. He lingered over supper. Hattie read by the fire while he repaired tack. One evening he recognized a line of poetry before she finished it. Hattie lowered the book. You read poetry? No. You just quoted the next line. Grayson pulled the stitch tighter through the leather. Coincidence. Hattie smiled and went back to reading. A few days later, she brought out her grandmother's recipe book. The pages were worn soft at the corners. Grayson washed his hands before touching it. That small act struck her harder than any compliment. He turned the pages carefully. When he reached the sourdough recipe, he paused. This one? This one. Bessie? Bessie. He looked toward the crock beside the stove. Mean-looking name for something that friendly. Hattie laughed. Snow pressed hard against the shutters that night. After supper, Grayson reached across the table. A trace of flour rested near Hattie's cheek. His hand stopped before touching her. He waited. Hattie did not move away. His thumb brushed the flour from her skin. Neither spoke. A log collapsed in the hearth with a sharp crack. Grayson pulled his hand back. The moment broke, but not completely. 2 mornings later, he found horse tracks beyond the trap line. 3 riders. One horse had a broken shoe that marked the snow unevenly. Grayson crouched over it. His face changed. That evening he said a name Hattie had not heard before. Josiah Galt. Who is he? Man who likes claims that belong to somebody else. The same week, far below them in Silver Plume, Clara Caldwell heard her father boasting after too much whiskey. Jebediah laughed to 2 men at the bar, said he had sold Grizzly Cade's mountain secret for more than Hattie had earned in all her years under his roof. Clara went pale. She tried to find someone willing to ride up. No one would attempt the trail. A blizzard came that night. For 3 days the mountain disappeared. Wind buried the porch steps. Snow climbed halfway up the windows. Hattie and Grayson stayed close to the stove, repairing harness, reading, baking, and once laughing until Hattie had tears in her eyes because Grayson insisted he could make biscuits and produce something closer to paving stones. On the 4th morning, the storm cleared. The world outside was white and painfully bright. Hattie opened the shutters. Something moved on the lower ridge. 3 black shapes, 3 riders. She stepped back from the window. Grayson came beside her. He saw them. His jaw tightened. That's Galt. Hattie looked toward the Winchester resting by the door. Friend of yours? Grayson kept his eyes on the ridge. No. The riders did not hurry. That made Hattie trust them even less. By noon, they were at the edge of the clearing. 3 men on tired horses, snow crusted white along their stirrups and coat hems. The one in front was narrow-faced and sharp-eyed, with a dark overcoat and a hat pulled low. Cade. Grayson stepped onto the porch. Galt. Josiah Galt smiled as if they had met by arrangement. Word is, you've got an abandoned claim up here. No claim for sale. Didn't say sale. His eyes moved past Grayson toward the house, then to Hattie, standing just inside the doorway. Caldwell said you built right over the old workings. Grayson's expression hardened. He talks too much. Galt laughed. Maybe. Said you once had a decent vein in there. There's nothing in that mountain worth your trouble. Galt looked toward the iron-reinforced door visible through the kitchen. I'll decide what my trouble is worth. The silence that followed was colder than the snow. Grayson did not reach for his rifle. He did not need to. This is my home. Galt's smile thinned. For now. He turned his horse. The other men followed him back toward the trees. Hattie waited until they disappeared. They're coming back. Yes. Grayson immediately began preparing. He showed Hattie the lower trail that curved south around the ridge. He set snowshoes beside the rear door and packed dried meat, matches, coffee, and a wool blanket into a canvas sack. Hattie watched him. You're planning for me to leave. I'm planning for you to have a choice. That word stopped her. Choice. The same thing he had given her in Caldwell's saloon. Hattie folded her arms. Then stop deciding what my choice will be. Grayson looked up. If danger comes, we decide together. Hattie, together. He held her gaze, then nodded. 3 days passed. Nothing happened. That was worse. The sky cleared on the 4th afternoon. Sunlight turned the snowfields bright enough to hurt the eyes. Grayson went outside to check the corral fence. His Winchester rested beside the porch door. Hattie was in the kitchen lifting a kettle when the rifle crack came from the timber. She froze. A second later, Grayson dropped to one knee in the snow. His hand went to his shoulder. Red spread through the wool. Grayson? He looked toward the house. Stay inside. 3 men stepped from the trees. Galt came first. One of his men kicked the Winchester away before Grayson could reach it. They dragged him against a porch post and bound his good arm to the timber. Galt crouched in front of him. Caldwell said you had a woman cook up here now. Grayson surged against the rope. Leave her out of this. Galt smiled. Inside, Hattie's hands had gone numb. For 1 second, she was back behind Caldwell's kitchen door, listening to men laugh while she made herself smaller. Then she saw Grayson's blood on the snow. Something inside her settled. Not calm. Decision. Her eyes moved across the kitchen. The cast-iron skillet, the kettle, the flour bin, the ash shovel, her room, her stove, her home. The first man kicked the door open. Hattie waited behind it. He took 1 step inside. The skillet struck the side of his head with a heavy clang. He dropped hard to his knees and stayed there. Galt cursed and rushed in. Hattie seized the ash shovel and flung a cloud of hot gray ash toward his face. He recoiled, coughing and swearing. The third man came through behind him. Hattie shoved the heavy work table with both hands. It caught his legs and drove him sideways into the wall. She reached for Grayson's Winchester, where it had been kicked across the threshold. Her fingers closed around it, then stopped. She did not know the mechanism well enough. Galt saw that. His mouth twisted. Caldwell said you were trouble. Hattie tightened both hands around the skillet. Caldwell talks too much. Behind Galt, wood cracked. The porch rail tore loose. Grayson came through the doorway with one arm hanging useless at his side. He moved on the nearest man before Galt could turn. Hattie kicked the dropped revolver under the stove. The third attacker tried to circle through the pantry. She slammed the kitchen door and dropped the bolt. For several seconds, the house became noise. Boots, furniture, breathing, wood cracking. Then Galt lunged for the revolver. Grayson stepped on his wrist. "Enough!" Galt froze. The fight ended there. They tied all three men and moved them to the storage shed once the immediate danger had passed. Only then did the house grow quiet. Wind hissed through a broken window. A chair lay on its side. Flour dust hung in the light. Hattie sat on the floor with the skillet across her lap. Her hands began to shake. Grayson saw it. He came down beside her despite the wound. "Look at me." She did. "Did they hurt you?" Hattie shook her head. Then she saw how much blood had soaked his shoulder. Her face crumpled. "You could have died. So could you. I wasn't going to let them take this place." She stopped. "Or you." Grayson's eyes changed. "You didn't owe me that." "No." Hattie looked straight at him. "I chose it." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "You were never invisible to me." Hattie's breath caught. Grayson continued slowly. "The bread opened something, but that isn't why I love you." He glanced toward the kitchen. "You work until a place feels lived in. You see what people are trying to hide and somehow you don't shame them for it. You brought laughter into this house." His voice lowered. "You stood beside the worst thing I ever did, and didn't turn away." Hattie looked toward the iron door. "And Sarah?" Grayson followed her gaze. "Loving you doesn't bury Sarah deeper." He swallowed. "It means I finally understand she didn't die so I could stop living." Hattie moved closer. He did not reach for her first. He waited. She closed the distance. Their kiss was quiet. Careful. The kind that came after fear had burned itself out. Later, beside the fire, Hattie cleaned and wrapped Grayson's shoulder while he tried not to wince. Outside, Galt and the others remained secured in the shed. Inside, 2 coffee cups sat on the table, 2 plates, 2 people holding hands openly for the first time. Then Hattie noticed the iron key still hanging at Grayson's chest. He touched it, slowly removed the leather cord, placed the key in her palm. "I don't want to carry this alone anymore." Hattie closed her fingers around it. The iron was still warm from his chest. She did not answer right away. Instead, she tied the leather cord around her wrist while she finished bandaging his shoulder. Outside, the wind dragged loose snow across the yard. Inside, the fire had burned low, and the house smelled of coffee, flour, and the faint sharpness of blood. Grayson looked tired. For once, he allowed himself to be. The next several weeks changed their routines. His shoulder healed slowly, which irritated him more than the wound itself. Hattie caught him one morning trying to lift a feed sack one-handed. She walked over without a word and took the other side. Grayson frowned. "I can manage." "You taught me this part." He looked at her, then let her help. By the time the upper trail opened enough for horses, the 3 prisoners were gaunt, angry, and eager to leave the mountain under any circumstances. Grayson and Hattie took them down toward Silver Plume, tied securely to their saddles, traveling carefully over stretches where thawing snow had turned the road to mud and slush. News reached town before they did. By noon, men were standing outside the freight office and general store watching Grayson ride in with Josiah Galt behind him. Clara Caldwell came running from the boarding house. "Hattie?" She stopped short when she saw the burgundy coat. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Clara said, "I tried to send word. Pa told them where you were." Galt confirmed enough of it before the local marshal had him inside the small town office. Caldwell had taken money and a promise of a share if Silver was found. Jebediah had not ridden up the mountain. He had not pulled a trigger. But everybody understood what he had set in motion. Hattie did not stay to watch the questioning. She had flour to buy. The Caldwell boarding house stood exactly where it always had. Same front steps, same windows, same swinging doors beyond the dining room. For a moment, Hattie stopped on the boardwalk. Grayson remained several paces behind her. He did not offer his arm, did not tell her she had nothing to fear. He simply waited. Hattie climbed the steps, then entered through the front door. Conversation weakened around the room. She felt the old reflex in her body, the urge to lower her eyes, to move quickly, to apologize for taking up space. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her basket. Then she saw the flour sacks near the counter. That was all she needed. "How much for 50 pounds? Jebediah stood behind the register. He seemed smaller than she remembered. "Hattie, how much?" He named the price. She counted the coins onto the counter. His face worked for a moment. "I didn't mean for anybody to get hurt." Hattie looked at him. "You paid me $2 a month and taught me to think that was all I deserved." Jebediah lowered his eyes. "I know better now." She took the receipt, folded it, and tucked it into her purse. Then she walked out. Grayson joined her on the boardwalk. "You all right?" Hattie looked toward the mountains rising white above town. "I will be." Spring came slowly. First the icicles shortened, then the creek began moving again beneath its crust. One afternoon, Hattie and Grayson opened the iron door together. They carried no supper plates, only a loaf of fresh bread and a handful of the first wildflowers Hattie had found below the south ridge. At the crosses, Grayson stood before Sarah's name for a long time. "Hattie and I are going to marry." The words came rough. Hattie remained several steps behind him. He touched William's cross. "Your father finally learned when to stop digging." Then he laid the bread and flowers down and stood. No plate, no ritual, only memory. That evening, rain tapped softly against the roof. Hattie removed a loaf from the oven while Grayson set the table. 2 plates, 2 cups. The old chairs that once belonged to Sarah and William had been moved carefully against the far wall, preserved but no longer waiting. Grayson sat down. Hattie noticed the small ring beside his coffee cup. Plain silver, nothing fancy. "First night you came here," he said. "This table was set for people who couldn't sit at it." Hattie looked at him. "Now every time I come in from the mountain, I look for you before I look for the fire." He pushed the ring across the table. "I don't need a cook, Hattie." His hand settled beside hers. "I don't need somebody to save me." A pause. I want my wife." His eyes stayed on hers. "If you want me for your husband." Hattie looking around the room, at Bessie bubbling beside the stove, at the key resting now in the kitchen drawer, at 2 plates, at the man who had waited for her answer from the beginning. "I want you." They married after the trails fully reopened. Clara came. So did a few people from Silver Plume who had learned, belatedly, to look Hattie in the eye. There was no grand celebration. Hattie baked the bread herself. By late spring, she and Grayson were taking loaves, preserves, and pies down to Silver Plume and Georgetown whenever the weather allowed. Her bread no longer came from a kitchen where she was expected to remain unseen. People began asking for it by name. Hattie's sourdough. Back at the mountain house, Grayson still trapped, guided, tended horses, and worked the high trails. Hattie still baked. They shared the rest. One evening, sunlight crossed the long dining table. Fresh bread sat beside honey, coffee, venison, and a jar of wildflowers. Hattie cut the loaf. Grayson reached for the first slice. She raised an eyebrow. "You gonna shout at the baker again?" A rare grin crossed his scarred face. "Depends how good it is." Hattie laughed. Grayson tore the slice in half and handed part of it back to her. Beyond them, the iron door remained closed. Not hidden, not feared. simply part of the house. Sarah and William were still loved. Hattie had replaced no one. Grayson had forgotten no one. The dead finally had memory. The living finally had supper. And maybe that was the quiet miracle of Hattie and Grayson's story. Not that grief disappeared. Not that the past suddenly stopped hurting. Sarah and William would always have a place in Grayson's heart, just as Hattie would always remember the years when she had been taught to make herself smaller. But neither of them had to remain trapped inside those old wounds. Sometimes a second chance arrives quietly. It may look like a warm coat laid across your shoulders, a hand waiting without forcing yours, or even a piece of bread that carries someone back to a kitchen they thought they had lost forever. Imagine yourself at that table after everything they endured. The snow is melting outside. Fresh bread is cooling beside the stove. Across from you sits someone who knows your scars, your mistakes, your fears, and still chooses to stay. Perhaps that is what love is at its strongest. Not rescuing someone from their past, but giving them enough safety to begin living beyond it. If Hattie and Grayson's journey stayed with you, tell me in the comments which moment touched you most. And if you'd like to spend more evenings with stories of frontier love, mystery, courage, and wounded hearts finding their way home, you're warmly invited to subscribe. There are more stories waiting beyond the next ridge.